The problem I have with that is that, like, part of my schedule, what I realized was that I need to get up at around 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Like, I can't nap past that point, or I won't be able to go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night when I'm supposed to. And my body just wants to nap.
Sure.
So, whatever. So I don't know how to manage that, and I've basically just been making myself get up, and then I kind of like zombie walk around the house or something for an hour or two until I'm, ready to make dinner.
So welcome to Therapeutic Tuesday. And for this week's Therapeutic Tuesday, we have a mini session with a guy called Alex. And in this session, the kind of instigation of the session is that Alex is having a crash around 5:30 each day. And he's trying to figure out why that crash is happening and how to avoid that crash. Where we go in the session is what becomes very clear to me is that he needs to listen to his body, and actually the simplest resolution is actually to avoid getting to the point of crashing by having a rest at an earlier point in the afternoon. And I explained to Alex kind of the reasons why I think that's important, and a bit about how to use the information, the wisdom that comes from the body as a way of navigating and steering on the path. So I think this is for many people on the recovery path from various fatigue-related conditions, this is a really important principle. So often at the time we have ideas about what should be happening, what shouldn't be happening, what people have told us, what we've read in books. I am an enormous believer in the value of listening to the body. And that's really, I think, the focus of where we go in this session. So here we go. This is Alex and exploring the importance of listening to the body. Yeah, look, thank you for reaching out. And I've only got a tiny bit of context, which is what you put in the email that Jenny forwarded to me. So maybe just give me a bit more background in terms of just kind of where you are at this point in terms of the recovery process, and particularly the challenge that you've got. We've got kind of 20 to 30 minutes, so I'll just see if I can be helpful in the time we've got.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of recovery, I've been ill for about 5 years. I don't feel like I'm making much progress. I've been, like, since I've been sick for about 6 months, I've been doing all kinds of stuff to work on my guts and sleep better, and all the basic kind of stuff that usually gets recommended by naturopaths and doctors. And so I would say that I'm still in phase one. And I suspect that there's some Epstein-Barr virus at play, but I haven't really had a chance to have a go at that yet.
What's your reasoning for that assumption?
I had mono when I was 22, which is like about 10 years before I fell ill. And when I got some testing done a couple years in, and they said that it looked like the mono was reactivated. And that made a lot of sense to me, because the type of, like, the illness that I got that took me out was extremely similar to the experience of mono that I had before. And even, the feeling of nausea and all this stuff is very similar to me, to what I had when I was younger. So I don't know, like, they weren't able to definitively say you have reactivated Epstein-Barr virus in your system. They said it looks like it, and there's these markers in place for it. But I feel like that's a real possibility, based on, like, the sudden onset of the illness and stuff too. Like, it feels like some kind of virus took over my body. Okay.
And in terms of your kind of baseline at the moment, would you say you're relatively stable in terms of where you are, in terms of your kind of day-to-day kind of level?
Yeah, the pacing is really great for that. I would say that there are days where I do stupid things and end up paying for it, but that's pretty rare. I'm pretty good at knowing when I need to back off and stop and stuff now. So Yeah, I would say I'm pretty stable.
Okay. And what does your baseline look like? So in a kind of average kind of day, what can you do? What can't you do? Like how does that look?
Um, I most of my activities are just making food, washing dishes. I do a grocery run once a week, but I don't. I would say I maybe leave my house to go for a walk to the park nearby or something like every other day. Uh, and yeah, um, I have trouble with reading things. So like I can consume a certain amount of information, but there's limits on that. There's limits on how long I can socialize with people. I spend most of my day napping, uh,
Okay.
and then yeah, so it's kind of like get up in the morning. I might check my email and make breakfast, and then I'm laying down again, and then I get up and I do lunch, and then I lay down and I get up and do dinner and stuff. And I have some ability to like kick around on Facebook or something, but like anything that's too intellectual or too emotionally draining or stress is terrible for me. I cannot expose myself to like any form of stress, or I'm just immediately very ill and need to go to bed. Like,
Okay.
does that give you the picture?
Yeah, that's helpful. And you were saying in your message that there's specifically this point between 4:30 and 7:30 in the afternoon, which feels. So just say a bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I started working on my sleep, I kind of just arbitrarily decided on a schedule for myself based on what I think is good for a human. So that was a few years ago. I started doing that, and it was basically like turn off my computer at 9:30, be asleep by 10:30 or 11, which was a fight for a long time, but which I've finally kind of gotten around to being able to do that. And then I was making myself get up at 8. And I was doing that until about a year or so ago, and then I moved, and the move seems to have taken me down a peg. And one of the things that changed after that was that I started having trouble getting up in the morning. Like it had been that I was getting up at 8, and I felt good about that, and things were great, and then it changed so that I wasn't feeling good about that anymore. And I've been experimenting with different times ever since. Like for a while I was getting up at 6:30, but then I noticed that like I feel great getting up at 6:30 one day, and then the next day I feel like garbage, and I'd end up sleeping, and it just wasn't didn't feel sustainable. So now I'm trying different times, but basically I get up somewhere between 6:30 and 10 a.m. and then do my stuff, and usually around 4:30 to 7 in the afternoon, I have like a pretty bad like low point where I'm like hardly able to move or do anything. I can't listen to music, like, and it's the problem I have with that is that like part of my schedule, what I realized was that I need to get up at around 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Like I can't nap past that point, or I won't be able to go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night when I'm supposed to. And my body just wants to nap.
Sure, sure.
Whatever. So I don't know how to manage that. And I've basically just been making myself get up, and then I kind of like zombie walk around the house or something for an hour or two until I'm ready to make dinner.
What sort of time do you normally have lunch at?
Usually around 1, 1.
And what do you normally do after lunch? Like what's that time between lunchtime and 4:30? What happens there?
Usually laying down. Sometimes it kind of depends on the day. Like sometimes I have appointments scheduled or things that I do, or I hang out with a friend or something. But I make a point of ending that activity by like 4, so that I can lay down at least until 5:30.
Okay. So there's obviously there's a much bigger picture here in terms of what's happening, in terms of what's getting clarity in terms of what's causing your symptoms and everything else in the first place. But obviously in the kind of constraint of time that we've got and the specific question you've got, there's this piece of the jigsaw which obviously we're looking at. It sounds like, to put it in quite simplistic terms, if you've got a certain amount of energy units in a day, let's say that normal functioning would be 100, and let's say you've got 50 for argument's sake, and you need to kind of have enough of those units to get through till kind of bedtime. It sounds like your system's running empty at kind of 4:30, or it's like having a charge on a phone and your phone's not fully charging anyway, but then it's kind of getting to kind of 5%, 3%, and it's just kind of on the edge.
Yeah, I think what's also happening is that if I push through that, then I get into an adrenaline thing. So then I'm up for like.
Then you go from tired to being tired and wired, and then it becomes even more difficult to then be able to kind of get quality rest after that. And again, what that says is that your normal energy production is running out, and then you're going to your reserve tank, and your reserve tank is your adrenals and your kind of more kind of nervous, kind of wired energy. So I'm always interested when there's particular crash points in the day. I'm always interested what's happening in the hours leading up to that. And do you have days that after lunch you go straight to bed and have like an hour or whatever of deep rest kind of straight after lunch, or relatively soon after lunch? And if you do, what happens?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I do have those sometimes, and there are certain days where I also don't crash as badly in the evening. So it's possible that those things are related. I haven't been really sure what to look for in terms of connections, because part of it's been like, oh, is it because I ate a piece of fruit and my sugar is all over the place, or I don't know what's going on.
Well, I think when you've got, so the body's fascinating in terms of the way that it creates its kind of rhythms and its kind of balances in terms of what happens. And it's like we get used, people that have never had chronic fatigue or, ME or fibromyalgia or whatever, and they still have all kinds of rhythms and routines in their body, which is why if they go and they fly and they change time zones, it takes the body a certain amount of time to adjust to that, because the rhythms and routines have to kind of reset themselves. It's why if somebody's used to having, a large dose of caffeine in the morning, if they don't get their caffeine hit, they kind of struggle most of the day because the body's waiting for the kind of caffeine hit. So we get these different kind of rhythms and kind of processes in terms of how the system's maintaining its balance. So there's the micro and there's the macro of this. So there's the micro of any particular day. Then there's the macro of the overall rhythms in terms of how your body is functioning. So sometimes it might be true that you eat or you don't eat a certain thing on a certain day, and that influences that day. But the fact that you have what sounds like a fairly consistent pattern around this suggests that there's something that's not just on any one given day, but it's the overall kind of routine that's happening. And the kind of sometimes easy fix that I see around this is to preempt the fact that the system's going to kind of run into the kind of emergency empty kind of zone before it gets there. And so having, let's say, and it might be half an hour, it might be an hour, it might be an hour and a half, and that might vary based upon the day. But having a deep rest where if you sleep, then that's fine. If you're using kind of a relaxation or something to kind of help bring down the nervous system whilst you're physically resting. But doing that, there's a kind of natural energy low that can happen after lunch anyway. There's a bunch of reasons why that is, partly hormonally. There tends to be a kind of dip in what's there. But also we eat a meal and we have to digest the meal, and that can take some energy sometimes to do that. So there's a bunch of reasons why that window of time is also kind of halfway through the day, or through the active day at least. So I'd be interested to see what happens if you just kind of, try it for like a week or, a couple of weeks. It might not have an impact immediately. It might need a bit of time to kind of rebuild up the kind of reserves of what's happening. But my guess is what I think will happen, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure, is that it will kind of take the edge off that kind of crash that's happening later in the afternoon. It also, when you run empty, as you described, and you kind of go to that adrenaline kind of mode, that's very depleting on the system. At any point where you're kind of really running down to almost zero and you're really having to kind of drag yourself, that's quite a stress physically and psycho-emotionally on the system. logistically, is that, I mean, it sounds like you're relatively housebound anyway, so it might take a bit of rejigging of things that you may or may not have kind of planned, but logistically, does it seem workable to do that?
Yeah, I think that seems achievable.
Okay. I know you had some other questions. I'm happy to take a little bit more time to kind of jump around some of those bits. I for that piece, from a pacing point of view, that's how I would normally encourage someone to address that. And I think really the thing to do is to do that for a few weeks, and it's either going to help significantly, help a bit, or it's not going to help. And well, that, you know, what happens is will be the information that we can kind of then kind of respond to on that. I'm trying to remind myself, and let me see if I can find the spreadsheet where Jenny shared with me. I think you also had a question about. Yeah, I think there was maybe you put it in your own words, but a sense of feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the level of certainty that people seem to have that isn't necessarily meeting with your experience, and some of the frustration that comes with that. I don't know if you want to open that up a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I don't feel a need to vent about that. I think I have felt stuck. And I know you've talked about that before, because there's this sense of like, oh, I've tried everything and it's not working. And I do feel like I've got a pretty solid foundation in place. Like, I really believe if I ever recover from the ME, I will be so much healthier than I was going in, which is one of the things that I appreciate getting from it. But I just, yeah, I hear you talk a lot about, you know, like, okay, you do this, and then when you start to feel better, and I'm like, yeah, but I never get to the part where I get to feel better. And then I wonder, I feel frustrated, and I feel like, what am I doing wrong? You know, like, yeah, it just feels like there's always a puzzle piece missing, and every once in a while I find something and I'm like, oh, maybe it's this, and then I experiment with that for a while and it doesn't really make me feel any better. So
well, I think there's something that's just to comment on that, I think, which is that when someone's going through the recovery journey, you can feel that you're getting it quote unquote wrong a lot of the time, because you're doing things that you think are going to have an impact that don't have an impact, or you kind of get optimistic about something. There's a kind of disappointment then that comes from that. And what I would say is that even as practitioners, it's like, notice how I didn't say to you, that's going to fix it. I said, I'm reasonably confident. I've got you know, it seems to make sense. As practitioners, we're also wrong quite a bit of the time. And in a sense, we get better at being right by the more experience we get, and the more patterns we see, and the more that we do something with a bunch of people and it works, sometimes doesn't other times, and we figure out why it worked and why it didn't work. And I think that there's a misconception sometimes that people can have, that especially when you hear recovery stories that people tell in retrospect, like someone's interviewed on, you know, Secrets to Recovery or a case study or something, and they tell you they kind of take 45 minutes to tell their kind of story, and you compress, you know, 3 years or 5 years or 20 years, whatever, into a kind of story. And what you hear is a series of moments of insight, like, you know, this was happening and then I discovered this and that happened. And the bit between the insight is often 6 months or a year or 5 years of just shit, basically, and feeling like stuff isn't working and stuff isn't moving forwards, and frustration and kind of stuckness and overwhelm. So I think it's important just to normalize that experience of feeling like it doesn't make sense, or you haven't got all the jigsaw pieces, that's often the driver of the curiosity and the questions that brings the next piece of insight. Or you have a crash and you're frustrated and pissed off and like, what the fuck's is happening? And then you deconstruct it and you break it down and you think, well, actually that happened and that's why it happened. And that kind of, that source of the crash there becomes the information for the next movement forward that comes on the other side. So I just think that experience of feeling unclear and frustrated and kind of like you're not getting it right is how most people feel a lot of the time on the recovery process.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question about, so the way that I've been getting to sleep the last few months has basically been like smoking pot, like intense amounts of marijuana, in order to get, like, my face goes numb and then I'm able to kind of like pass out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it's doing is causing my whole body to relax in a way that allows me to fall asleep. Um, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, because I've heard that like pod is not necessarily going to give you a really good deep sleep, and I don't want to mess myself up either. But it seems to be the only thing right now that is putting me out.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from, like, I haven't tried like intense like horse tranquilizers from the doctor or whatever, but
Sure.
in terms of natural stuff like melatonin has stopped being effective. And
Yeah. So for me, what happens with sleep at night is normally a reflection of what's been happening in the nervous system during the day. So if the nervous system is consistently overstimulated and agitated during the day, it's often much more difficult to sleep at night. And there's lots of metaphorical ways to put it, but one of the ways I like is it's like, if that's the level, if that's completely wired and that's completely kind of relaxed, then maybe you need to get to there for the system to be able to relax and sleep. Like, sleep is a process of surrender and letting go. And it's a kind of surreal, really, to think about it, that every single night of our lives, at least that we sleep, we basically have a mini death. Like, we completely surrender and we let go and our mind shuts off and we fall asleep. And that's actually psychologically, to get someone therapeutically, for example, to completely surrender and let go into their emotions and their experience can be quite a big step for someone to take. Yet we all do it every night. If that's the level we need to get to for the system to be able to kind of to switch off, if we're kind of up here and we're kind of used to kind of being wired and the system's used to kind of being on, then yes, smoking marijuana may, some people do the opposite, but for some people it will settle and it will kind of calm the system. But the question is, why is the system ramped up in the first place?
right,
And in a sense, I'm not necessarily taking opinion about the use of kind of marijuana to sleep. More, my point is, you want your nervous system to not be so agitated that you need something like that to switch it off in the first place. And that opens up a whole other set of questions around maladaptive stress response and around what are the things that are causing the system to kind of be up here that's requiring something, quite strong to then bring the system down.
Mm. Those are great questions. I do feel like there's like my body has a reduced capacity to deal with stress because of trauma and also being sick, and stress requires energy and all those things.
Yeah, and being sick is its own trauma, and if you're getting to a point in the day where you're physically running out of energy, you're then having to use your nervous energy to keep your system going. That's also ramping up your stress levels. But I would say it's a very strong indication in terms of like where do you put your kind of your focus and your kind of resources. And yes, figuring out what's happening on a physical level, what you're doing on your digestion, I think sounds important, and I think it's good that you're doing that. But given what you mentioned earlier, and you just re-mentioned there in terms of stress tolerance being very, very low, again, that suggests that the system is because it's possible to be fatigued and you're not going to have great stress tolerance, but have some stress tolerance. When stress tolerance is that low, it normally means there's also this kind of overwired, overstimulated system, and the fact that you're seeing sleep impacted the way that it is. That if you can calm down your nervous system, I think that's going to have a significantly positive impact on the overall picture. And one of the ways that I put it is, for the body to heal, it has to be in a healing state. And if your body's in a constant state of stress, then you can take the best supplements, eat the best food, do all the right things, but it's just not going to have the impact that it ultimately needs to have. In terms of kind of pathways to that, I would definitely look at the trauma piece, and it's probably a bigger conversation we have the time for now. But I think don't underestimate the impact of that. I would look at the various stress patterns that are perpetuating that in your nervous system now. I would look at I don't know if you've had an experience of meditation or mindfulness, but that can be another way which part of a wider, it's not necessarily enough on its own, but as part of a wider picture can be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, those are great suggestions. I was meditating quite a bit. I haven't done it a lot in the last year. Just it's been hard to find a style that is not physically draining.
Yeah.
For me, and a lot of the time I'm meditating. I'm like, well, I could be laying down right now.
Yeah. So for stage one, often just listening to guided relaxations and visualizations, meditation in the more traditional sense can take quite a bit of effort, to kind of notice thought, let go of thought, bring your attention back. It's actually mentally takes quite a lot of focus to be able to do that. So another pathway to, at least in the short term, helping calm the system is just to listen to things which are actively calming and settling by visualization or just becoming aware of breath. So it's less about the concentration piece and more about just kind of encouragement of calming and settling of the system. And the way that I would look at where you are is when things feel stuck and they feel they've been stuck for a period of time, just like we get into downward spirals, we also get into upward spirals. So if you can get a few things to move in the right direction, then you'll hopefully start seeing a number more things moving in the right direction. So for example, let's assume that by taking that earlier rest in the afternoon, let's say that just helps things settle, takes the edge off that kind of crash that comes later, lets your system rest a little bit more. You might find you're a little bit calmer when you go to bed at night. You sleep a little bit deeper. You wake up a bit more refreshed. Your mindset's a bit more positive. It's easier to listen to your body because it doesn't feel so kind of completely crashed in the process. There's a bit more kind of concentration that's there, which then allows you to kind of spend a bit more time figuring out what's happening. So you start to kind of, by shifting a few things, you start to be able to get on a different track, which then means you can do more things to support that process. People are often very aware of downward spirals, but forget that you also get upward spirals. And when you feel stuck, it can feel overwhelming. Like, am I going to get from here to kind of there? But you don't need to get from here to there. You need to get from here to a few points forward, which then allows things to move in an easier direction.
Yeah, that does give me some things to work on. I appreciate your opinions. I did want to say thank you so much for not just for helping me today, but all the information that you put out on the internet, and the super conference was super. And I think, it makes a difference, being able to consume all this information. I mean, when doctors, I don't have the guidance of a health professional who knows what they're talking about. So to have these resources available, does, in the early days of being sick, I was going way downhill really quickly. And finding Sarah Myhill's website, finding the resources that you put online and a few other people, that set me on sort of an even keel. And I feel like I would be in such a worse place if it wasn't for those resources. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I always wish we could do more. So it's my frustration. We're limited in the time that we have today, but I appreciate you. Thank you for saying that. And it means a lot. And I appreciate also you being willing to be vulnerable in this way, because my hope is by filming some kind of mini kind of sessions like this, it's a more helpful living example of the ideas rather than just kind of teaching it as a theory. So I appreciate you being willing to be vulnerable and share a bit of your experience. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks a lot, Alan.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. Please let me know with the kind of the afternoon rest piece. Maybe you could drop me a note in a couple of weeks and just let me know how you got my email from me sending you the link for the call. So let me know how you go with that. I'd be curious to hear.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye. So I hope that was helpful and useful. I cannot emphasize enough how important I think it is to use your body as a primary source of information to navigate and steer the path. For tomorrow's session, it's Wellness Wednesday, and we have an excerpt from my interview with Dr. Neil Nathan as part of the Fatigue Super Conference. Dr. Nathan is one of the doctors and medical experts that I most admire in the field of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and Lyme disease and so on. And in this excerpt coming up tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the importance of humility, the importance of the place really that physicians and practitioners meet their patients and clients from. So I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.